What do you get when you cross the Atlantic with the Titanic? Well, if you can complete these 8 questions, these 8 problems, and solve the code at the bottom of the sheet, then you'll have the answer to that question, to that riddle. The first question has to do with finding means and medians. So let me remind you of the formula for a mean. The mean is represented by x bar, and x bar is the sum of all the x's divided by how many x's there are. Or in other words, the mean is the sum of all the pieces of data for which we're trying to find the mean, and then divide by how many pieces of data there are. And then a reminder of median. Median is in the middle. So to find the median for a set of data, I'm going to list all the numbers in order, either ascending order, so starting from the lowest and going to the highest, or descending order, starting with the highest and going down to the low. So you could either ascend or descend, it doesn't matter, but you want them in order so that you can easily find which one is in the middle. And then finally, the mode will tell us which score, in this case, which time score appears the most often. Now, this activity doesn't ask us to calculate the mid-range, but I do want to make sure you're able to do the mid-range. Remember that to calculate the mid-range, you take the highest value and the lowest value, add them together, and then divide by half. So we're trying to find right in the middle of the high and the low, not the number that's listed, the piece of data that's listed, but if all we have was the high number and the low number, what would be right in the middle of them? Let's look at another example, this number 3, because number 2 is again just asking us to practice that we understand what mean, median, and mode are. But for number 3, it's a little more reaching than just that. So what I've done is I've written out what x bar, the average, the mean average is, and that is given as 98 3/10 of a pound. N is how many pieces of data we have, and that's given as 32 math students. And the question says, what would their total weight be? So the total weight is what we're looking for. That's the sum of all of their weights. If I apply this formula, x bar equals the sum of all the x's divided by the number of x's, so 32, then I could solve for the sum of all the x's. So in other words, if we have an average, a mean average, if we have the mean and we know how many pieces of data there are, then multiplying the mean, in this case 98.3, times n, that in this case 32, would give us the total. Number 4 is similar. You do have to know a little bit about our months. So number 4 here in the bottom left, reading the question, the bakery sold 869 pies, so I know that 869 is going to be the total. I could fill that in for the sum of all the x's. The month of January, what I need to know is that there are 31 days in January. So the n, the number of days, is going to be 31. And then finally, what was the mean number of pies sold? So I know that the mean is what I'm trying to find. The first step to being a good problem solver is understanding the problem. One way to understand the problem is to highlight, as you see I did here in this example, highlight the important parts of the problem, and then to list what we know about the problem. And then the next thing to do would be to write out a formula we can use to solve the problem, which we have right here. So if we applied the same formula, we would have x bar is equal to, or the mean is equal to 869 divided by 31. And that'll give us the x bar. Now, with regards to rounding, what you'll need to do is seek out your answer at the bottom of each sheet. The bottom of the sheet, find your answer there. Most of them, if they are rounded to the nearest tenth. But apply rounding based on how you find the answers at the bottom of the sheet. Looking at number 5, Julie has taken 5 tests in science this semester. On the first 3 tests, her mean average was 70%, and on the last 2, her mean average was 90%. We want to find the mean for all 5 scores. Well, right off the bat, what I can see is that we've got 5 tests, and I can see that what we're trying to discover is the mean, the x bar. So what I need to do is use this additional information. First 3 tests, her mean average was 70. The last 2 tests, mean average was 90, to calculate what her total is so far. And the first step to being a good problem solver is understanding the problem and recognizing that we're trying to find x bar, and that we're going to use this information about her 5 scores to calculate that x bar. The next step is to think through a plan. My plan is going to be using this formula. So carrying out the formula, what we can do is see that if our first three scores were 70, then multiplying 3 times 70, and then her last 2 scores were 90, so 2 90s. You could think of it as a 70, 70, and 70. It doesn't matter what her individual scores are, but we know that if we used 70 for all 3, it would in fact be representative of her scores. And then 90 and 90 would in fact be representative of her last 2 scores. So summing this all up is the same as doing 3 times 70 plus 2 times 90. And that would give us the sum of all the scores. And we know that there's 5 scores altogether. So once I add these scores up and divide by 5, I will have her mean average. Let's look at number 6. It's really quite similar, using the same process. Understanding the problem, we've got that on his trip, Clink drove for 3 hours at an average speed of 50 miles per hour. So this helps me understand that n, in this case, the n is going to be the number of hours. N is going to be represented by hours. What was his average speed for the entire trip? So I know that I'm going to be looking for his average speed. I can use the information that's given to find n, even though it doesn't say what n is directly, like we had on number 5, where it very directly said n was 5 tests. I can find how many hours are being considered by reading the problem and seeing there's 3 hours and then 2 more hours. So I can see that n is going to be 5 hours. I can also see that the total number of miles covered So he drove 3 hours at an average speed of 50 miles per hour. So I could see that that's going to be 150 miles covered altogether. And then he drove 2 hours at an average speed of 30 miles an hour. So altogether he's covered 60 miles at that point. So I can find the sum, the total sum of hours, and use that to calculate the mean. So the mean average is going to be 3 times 50 plus 2 times 50. And then I'm going to divide by the number of hours he's traveled, which is 5. And that'll give us the mean average. Well, I hope that this helps you get a little bit better grasp of the work we can do with a mean. Let's look now for number 7 at a mode. What I wanted to show you with this example, because you already know that the mode means the number that appears in the list the most often. Sometimes it's a tie, so it could be numbers that appear the most often. But one method is simply organizing the information in a way that we could use it. So one way we could do that is by collecting tallies. You could list all the numbers in order or rewrite them in groups. Here's what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write a tally for each number as I go. So I'm going to start with this first column and see that there's 2, 1, 2, 0, 2. So I'm just keeping a tally list of how many there are. 0, 3, 2, 3, 1. I've done the first two columns. 2, 2, 1, 1, 1. 2, 2, 1, 1, 1. With tallies, as soon as I get to 5, I put a slash through it. And then the fourth row, 3, 0, 1, 2, 2. 3, 0, 1, 2, 2. And then finally the last column, 2, 1, 2, 1, 3. 2, 1, 2, 1, 3. The mode is standing out pretty clearly as the number that appears the most often is the 2, it seems. But using these tallies might be a good way to organize the information and to be able to find that mode pretty easily. And finally, number 8, Marissa and her grade. Marissa has taken 4 100-point tests in math, and her mean score is 89. How many points has she scored altogether? So I'm looking for the sum of all x's. So I could use x bar equals the sum of all the x's divided by 4. So 89, that mean the x bar, times n is going to give us the sum. That's our first part. And then moving on to the second part of this question, what score does she need on test number 5 so that the mean for all 5 scores will be 90? Well, now I'm going to say that x bar equals 89. I'm sorry, didn't mean to write an 89. We're going for an x bar of 90, but actually it's not equal to 90, is it? She wants average that's greater or equal to 90. Or, well, let me take that back, because it does, as I read the problem more carefully, you can see the mean of all 5 scores will be 90. So let me take that greater than back. So we're not looking for at least 90. By the way this is phrased, we're going for exactly 90. Okay, so we're looking for an x bar of 90. We're given that the number of test scores is now 5, and we need to find what she needs on that last test so that this works out. Well, we could see that her first four tests are represented by 89s. And then what we're looking for is this last x. So her fifth score is x. Do you see that the formula we could then use, or the equation we could use, is that x bar is equal to her 4 89s plus her last score, her score 5, divided by 5. And solve for x, multiply 5 times 90, and then divide by, or subtract rather, subtract the 4 times 89, and we would be left with x. I hope that helps you if you did have any struggles with these questions or questions like these. If you do have further questions about any of this type of problem, I hope that you won't hesitate to reach out to me.